Hello, 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 you guys, and welcome back to a new episode of Crooked Illness. Looking at today's title, you guys can see that we are going to be getting into being bipolar today. Here to have this conversation with me is Mimi, founder of Ride or Die, a business consulting and event coordination business specializing mainly in the automotive industry. Mimi was also a musician and actress in the past, but enjoys hosting events to help those in need. I was lucky to connect with Mimi through my friend Jay, who is the host of the Hard Parking podcast. I really wanted Mimi to join me in this conversation after we connected at a really incredible event we will talk about later on in this episode that was for suicide prevention. So without further ado, welcome Mimi to the podcast.
You have like a little crowd like button you can hit where it's like
gotta hit the applause. Mimi is here and we are ready to do this. So I wanna hear from you. I want to hear from you about this. Talk to me about a reason to stay event, the one that we met at, and what your involvement in this event was and what it means to you.
So in 2018, I had a brief phone conversation with Maggie because we kind of connected through my producer who suggested that one of my songs that I put out that I perform at one of their events. And in talking to Maggie at the time, I was going through some serious therapy. And one of the things that the therapist had mentioned to me is, you know, when you wake up in the morning, make sure you're doing positive affirmations and think of your reasons to stay. And I was like, oh, I love that. Like that whole reason to stay thing really hit me hard. And fast forward to, 2020, a couple weeks prior to the actual event, we had lost a good 3 people in the community to suicide. One who's very well connected in the community. I would say he's probably like the male version of me. From my understanding, he ran a team. He was like really well known in the community for doing really positive things. And he was always upbeat. Like I got to meet his mom at A Reason to Stay. We'll talk about that later. But he was one of those people that you would never thought was struggling. And so his death really hit everyone really hard. And I had all these people DMing me like, when are you doing your next suicide awareness event? Because I did one last year. And I said, I'm feeling you guys. I feel like with the pandemic, with what, I'm experiencing, what everyone is experiencing, it's got a really heavy mental impact on everyone with the isolation. And I thought, wow, what if I just do something that has something to do with A Reason to Stay? Mm-hmm. So with COVID and everything else, it's really hard to do an event in one, single location right now, especially something that in the moment was impacting the community so heavily. I knew it would be a really big event. The last charity event I was involved with, it was with AZ Elites, and a lot of the same people that you saw at that event. There was over 600 cars there. And so I was like, we need a really big lot. And
AZ Elites, is AZ Elites, are they another car community?
They're a car team,
okay.
Or car club. They're fairly new. I think in March, I want to say I did an anti-donut meet. And that was like the last event I could really do with COVID at one of the locations that I did it at. But that was the first time I met a lot of them, and their team then just had a few members. Now I think they're like a couple hundred, and they're kind of, they've become very close friends of mine, and they've been really into doing charity events as well. So like I said, they were one of a few teams that we'll probably mention at some point in time in this podcast or episode, but they've reached out and said, let's collaborate and do a suicide awareness event. So I just started reaching out to all of the businesses that I kind of work with or I know someone at. I just started really kind of leveraging my connections and said, a lot of people were really scared. A lot of the business owners were like, I don't know. I had one tell me their legal team wouldn't allow more than 50 people, on the lot or more than 10 people in the building. And I said, well, maybe I can make this work if we do it like a drive-a-thon or like a marathon. And
Yeah. And the outside part too, because I remember,
yeah.
actually going to the event, after
Mhm.
Jay invited me and seeing, all the different people there from the car community and also seeing that car, the
Yeah.
blue car with the a
Yeah.
reason to stay. So I like how you talk about, the idea for this coming from, when you were in therapy and your therapist asking you, what is your reasons to stay? Positive
Yeah.
affirmations, and where's that coming from, and how you really combine that with what you love, which is the car community. How you combine the two of them? So
Yeah.
I wanted you to talk about that car where you go up and
Yeah.
you sign it. So tell me a little bit about that.
So I was thinking about a canvas. Like originally we were talking about, and I called Jay and I was like, Jay, I want to do this event. I would love to have One Auto, be involved. I'm also on the One Auto Council, but I always go to Jay and toss around ideas with him. And he was like, I would love to be involved. So Jay, unfortunately, recently lost a friend to suicide too. And I think it was one of the first ones he's experienced. So it just seemed like it was it's always good time to talk about mental health, but at this time it just seemed like so many people were being impacted by it. So it was a matter of conversation, of thinking about how we could raise money, raise awareness, move from one location to the next in a way that made sense. And my brain is like really creative. So my brain
Mhm.
started going, what if I put a decal on the side of this car and we just have everybody write on it? And then it was like, well, who are we going to find to donate their car, be it
Mhm.
paint or wrap? So I was originally going to do my car. I don't know if you've seen my car, but it was recently wrapped about a year ago. And it's a very cool color, but everyone was like, don't do your car. Don't do your car. You're going to ruin it. And I'm like, but I'm donating it to the cause. And I got a DM from a friend who said, I think I know the perfect person. This means a lot to him. He struggles with mental illness, and he may be okay with it. So he gave me his phone number. I call Chris, who you know as AZ Stinger, who owns that amazing teal car. And we talked for over an hour, and I
Wow.
realized how much it meant to him. And I said, this is so perfect. So can you come to my house? Let's measure your car. I'll design the logo and we'll put it on the car, but we needed to find someone to plot it out. So we had Wrap Sesh, a business that I used to work with as a business consultant. They're the ones who wrap my car. They
Yeah.
ended up plotting it for us and donating their time for the cause, and he had the film already, so we didn't have to put any money out of our pocket. And there is some footage of us actually putting it on in my garage, me, my husband, and him. This like 6 foot long, 8 inch wide, a reason to stay
Wow. Yeah.
logo. And everyone at these events got to sign it. And I could tell you, it was extremely emotional to see children, young adults, older folks. They were all signing it. They would all take a moment, and think about what their reasons were to stay. And I thought, man, let's keep this going for like 30 days. So I asked Chris, can you donate your car for like 30 days and just go to all these events from here to California? And he's like, oh yeah, I might even leave it on longer.
That's
So
awesome. That's so cool. Because I
yeah.
remember when I saw that car and then walking out and then me signing it. And then my boyfriend Dan came as well, signed it, and just seeing everybody there and just being able to connect and see that this what the event is for, suicide prevention and awareness, and also, getting to just chat with you a little bit, talk with, Maggie from Reborn Social, raising money for the app that she created, which I thought was really cool, is that
Right.
allows people to have, from my understanding, it allows you to have therapy sessions that are really affordable from anywhere virtually. So you could be in your
Yeah.
home, you could
Right.
be, wherever, and just making that more accessible to people, because that's
Yeah.
something too that, I feel like is definitely could be a barrier for a lot of people, is the cost of therapy, and
Oh my God.
figuring that
Yeah.
out, especially, whether you're like a college student or whatever it is. And, just being able to see that and be at that event was super awesome. And I was, just really excited that we got to connect and talk about that. But I really wanted to ask you something else, because I know that last time we talked, we had a really good conversation that actually went on for over an hour. And I never,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, I never, usually when I do these calls, they don't last this long, but we talked and talked and talked, and we were talking about so many things.
We
But
had a
one
lot
of
in
the,
common.
I
I don't
know.
get
And
to talk to people very often about this stuff. So, and it's
yeah.
funny because I'm a huge advocate for it and I'm always wanting to talk about it, but you don't always meet people who are just as open as, let's say we are. And we
Mhm.
don't even know each other. And the stuff we were telling each other on the phone call, I don't even think my parents know.
Yeah, no, a
Or
hundred
like my really,
percent.
you know what I mean?
A
So
100%, because I feel
when you
like,
can relate, it's
it's
different.
funny because, I was very transparent about, me being bipolar and my diagnosis, and then you as well. And I feel like hearing the things that you were telling me, and you said a lot of things that I wrote down that I'm like, we're going to get it. We're going to talk about this. But one of them, I want to ask you about is we talked last time about the differences between physical versus a mental disability. So I want to ask you, do you think do you think a mental disability or mental illness receives a different reaction or treatment from people compared to a physical one? And if so, why do you think that is?
100%. And I think that, the way that businesses, companies, the Olympics, schools, the community approaches disabilities or those who are handicapped, right? It's very visual a lot of times. And
Mm-hmm.
people, when they see that, they naturally say, how can I help you? And I think I said to you that if I was in a wheelchair and I had been approaching the door, let's say, of a Starbucks, or actually Dutch Bros, because I don't like Starbucks. And I think that a lot of times people naturally, as you're approaching the door and you're visibly, handicapped or have a disability, they open the door for you, and
Mm-hmm.
they're very compassionate and understanding. But when you look at someone like myself or yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody is like the news or the movies make out people who have mental disabilities. A lot of times you're walking around with this invisible illness that unless you tell somebody what you're going through, they would otherwise have no idea. Therefore, it makes it harder for you to seek help, talk to people, or B, for people to offer to help you. And
Mm-hmm.
then, not to jump the gun, but I know that like a lot of times when I tell people this, especially after this event, I think
Mm-hmm.
so many more people in the community have reached out to me. Like, I had no idea you struggled with this stuff. Because pre-event, I really spoke a lot to my own personal experiences. And even after the event, the video that I made really talks about how much I struggled with trying to find help, affordable help now, not 2 months
Mm-hmm.
from now, but a lot of times it makes it hard, even with my family, when I talk to my dad, it's like, or my mom, a lot of times they don't quite grasp that it's not something I can necessarily control or without medication or therapy, that it's not something that is visible to them. So of course they look at me and they see me, smiling or like being hyper or being
Yeah.
outgoing, or I was fronting a rock band and doing all these things. So when people look at you and they see that, they don't know that it takes me sometimes hours to get myself psyched enough to leave the house.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for me to get out of my head a lot, and sometimes I'll be in my pajamas for days, but people don't see that side of things,
Yeah, and I
so
feel like
it makes
that's
it difficult.
so relatable too, that what you're saying right there is because I know for me at least, like, because I know we still like don't really know each other that well, but when I came
Yeah,
to the event and I saw you on the mic and all the energy you had, and you were constantly smiling, running around, like so much energy, happy, excited, it's like I feel like sometimes when people see that, or they see a side of you that you're always showing to everybody, they don't
yeah,
really understand it when you say, well, I was diagnosed bipolar, and this is kind of where I was before, and this is what I went through. And sometimes it's hard because, of how you seem on the outside or how you look, and other people aren't really, maybe they don't have that much of an understanding of mental illness because maybe they haven't been around a lot of people, or they've just never been around period anything relating to that, and they don't know too much about it. So when, you open up and say that, they're like, what? Like, no way. Like,
Yeah.
how is that like even a thing for you? And that, it
Yeah.
is hard. And I feel like, the more that we continue to have these conversations and make it more normal for people to talk about these things, and I feel like it won't be looked at like, so foreign, or so like that's so
Yeah.
hard to grasp or really believe.
It's very hurtful too. Like, so I think, first something came to me when I was really, really sick and first diagnosed. Naturally, I wanted to learn as much as possible about what this meant, but I felt so relieved, knowing, oh, there's a name for this thing I've been dealing with. But
Mm-hmm.
I listened to Jim Carrey, and he said, so I have a tattoo I got, which, by the way, I don't remember getting this. That's how medicated I was. So this says deep rest. Okay. Now that normally would be depressed, but the way he put it in deep rest is that when you have a mental illness or you have, an episode, it's your body telling you it's tired of carrying around this avatar. So what I call my avatar is what you saw the day that you saw me on the mic, which is, I have to get myself so like, you could do this, Mimi, come on, like on my way out of the house, like, to get pumped up just to leave the house and be in front of people. And then it's almost like I'm so anxious and so in my head that I get overly talkative, overly hyper. I'm always making jokes. It's like, I don't want somebody to stop and go, are you okay? Because I'll probably fall apart and start bawling my eyes out, to be honest. But when he said that to me, it hit me so deep because I was so down, like, I mean, so down in this like dark place that he was like, you have to understand that your body needs to take this time to recuperate. You have to dig deep in the trauma and start like getting yourself the help and the therapy you need, and stop going and going and going and running from your demons, and take some time to take a deep rest. Wow. And I was like, man, if anybody knows what he's talking about, it hit me so hard that I went out and got it tattooed on my body, which, I mean, if you ever saw my tattoos, they're all extremely artsy, like very colorful, but I never thought I would get ones on my arms, but that's how much it meant to me. And I think it really opened my eyes to the fact that that's why so many people, when I tell them what I struggle with, they look at me and they're like, no, because they're so used to seeing what is on TV or what they hear about in the news and what mental illness is supposed to look like, or be like, and they say these hurtful things like, oh, that girl must be crazy, she must be bipolar, she's all over the place. And I'll always say, hey, it's funny, I'll go, hey, I'm bipolar.
Yeah.
So, and then that's when they're like, wait, what? You are? And I'm like, yes. And I'm like, there's different types of illnesses. You need to educate yourselves. There's a lot of information out there that people, once I tell them I'm bipolar, I usually tell them, you should probably read about it, because you would be surprised how many people out there that you idolize, that are athletes, that are singers, that are actresses, that are successful, and that you idolize, that are struggling with this every single day. And you had no idea, but yet you're going to judge the woman down the street from you because she seems a little off today. She's in her pajamas. She seems a little irritated. You're going to tell her she's crazy and then ignore her, when really she needs you to pay attention and ask her if she's okay and if she needs help. But if she came outside to get her newspaper in a wheelchair, right, and fell out of her wheelchair, you're having her newspaper off the driveway, you'd say, oh my gosh, can I help you?
Yeah, that's something else that I wanted to get into with you, kind of like your own personal experience with bipolar disorder, like both before and after you received a diagnosis, because I know that's something we also got into, and we're talking about, both our own personal things with that. Like, what was it like for you, the first time you heard bipolar disorder? Because I know for me, like, all the connotations I had growing
Yeah.
up with that
Stigmas.
were extremely negative. And I just know that because I know, my aunt is bipolar. And I remember hearing stories of, she's just out of control, crazy, unstable, like can't, like just doesn't want to be, no one wants to be around her.
Yeah.
Nothing, no one wants anything to do with her. And just, it was so negative to me that I almost thought, I'm like, but I would sit there and think, and I would be like, how can someone possibly be at a point where they can't control themselves? Like, what is that like? What is, I'm sitting there like, what would that feel like? And then finally when I experienced that, I was just like it's so weird to even put that into words, what that was
Yeah.
like at that time. But I want to hear about, your experience. So like both before and after your diagnosis, like what was your experience with bipolar disorder like?
So I think I've always, so as a child, I think I told you I was a lot different than my sisters and people that I knew. And I never really understood what made me different.
Mm-hmm.
I was way more emotional than other people. I felt very, I now found out the word is empath, right? I felt like I was constantly riding this wave of super hyperactive all the time, with
Mm-hmm.
entertaining everybody. Everybody thought I was going to grow up to be a comedian because I was like, if there was tension in my house or my parents were arguing or there was something going on, I would come downstairs with like a sombrero on and just like
Mm-hmm.
start playing my little 2-string guitar and try and make everyone laugh.
Yeah.
But then you would find me in my room, like door closed, like in this super dark space. And I remember even telling my little sister, and I'm like a little kid, saying, I'm never gonna make it past my teenage years. And she would always be like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I just don't feel like I'm gonna make it through. Like, I just feel like I'm too sensitive and too hard on myself. And like, I would always have this little voice in my head. Not that I actually hear voices or anything like that, but it was always like, you're not good enough and you're stupid and, you're not talented like your sisters. And I would get into these really dark, really depressing moods, and you start having like those, I guess now I know the term is suicidal ideation, but like, what if I just disappeared? Would anyone care? And I started to go see a therapist in high school when I was 15. So it's, I remember her telling my parents that I was a manic depressive and I had social anxiety and things like that. And I think my parents knew I was a little kind of awkward when it came to socializing because I was either super hyper or very quiet with my head down. My mom would always go, lift your chin up, lift your chin up.
Yeah.
And I was always one or the other, like super shy and quiet, total introvert, or the freaking social butterfly highlight of every event and show and Christmas party, like Mimi is the entertainer. When they told my parents that I was manic depressive, I think that, naturally being a Sicilian kind of family, old school conservative, to them it was like, yeah, no, she just hormonal teenager going through some rebellious phase. And
So they didn't accept it. They were like, no.
not at first, no.
Yeah.
And then of course, like, it happened again in college where I had an episode and manic episode in college, and the teachers actually noticed it and sent me to the school psychiatrist. And I was in there probably more than I was going to class. And he was like, do your parents know that you have manic depression? And I'm like, I've heard this term before. Where did I hear it? And I'm going back, and he's like, I'm going to put you on something called Paxil. And I was self-medicating a lot previous to this, which, I didn't realize what that really was. I always thought it was just experimenting, but I was trying to find a way to like level myself out, but even then, reaching out again to my parents and telling them what's going on, they didn't understand. Why do you need to be on Paxil? Why are you having panic attacks? What do you mean? You know what I mean? So it was like, you just need to not be stressed out. You just need to, not worry about the past and things that people normally say to you when you're simply struggling with being stressed out. There's a
Like
huge
like
difference.
they're trying to help you, but they don't know how.
Yeah, so I didn't really even know how, and I didn't know back then. The internet wasn't really. I'm 41 years old, so like today you could
Which
be
is
like,
crazy, by the way.
yeah,
That I was like, what? Like,
today you could Google everything and anything and like find everything out. Like back then you had to go to a library.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was too sick to leave my house, never mind go to a library, you know, like, but you know, here I am, fast forward to 2018, my thyroid stopped working and it like amplified everything and anything I was already struggling with. And when I say amplified, I mean like it's become debilitating to the point where it's affected my job and everything else. So now finding out from a doctor, and I got 3 different opinions because, you know, you hear it the first time and you hear that you need to be on these medications, and I'm a homeopathic. I told you that I barely even took Tylenol. Like I'm really into home remedies when my son and I get sick because we're allergic to like everything, every antibiotic you can name. So in finding out that there's this name for it and that manic depression and bipolar is the same thing, and now in today's world with technology and with what was available to me, I am a big researcher and I became highly dedicated to finding out more. But I felt so validated that there, you know, after hearing, okay, you've had this thing your whole life and now it's like really amplified, and this is what it means to have a manic episode, and this is what happens with, you know, like between the spending of the money and like, you know, there's all these things that I started kind of putting all the pieces together and go, oh my gosh, like there's not something necessarily wrong with me, right? Because a lot of times people will think, oh, mental illness means that, you know, you're incapable of all these things, when really I've been really changing the way that I think about it. And I think, well, I wouldn't be as creative as I was. I wouldn't be as involved in the many things that I do, you know. In one day I do more than some people can do in a week.
Yeah.
And although it's my downfall and it can become very overwhelming, I almost started seeing it as like a superpower, you know. And I was like, wow, you know, I'm going to try and find the positive in all this now that I understand it, and I'm going to start educating other people. I'm going to start educating my family, and I'm going to start educating my husband, so that way they can say, I'm noticing that you are this, this, and this. Like, are you okay? Because that's important to me to know, because sometimes you don't realize you're even going through a manic episode. You don't recognize it. I've become so self-aware and I've educated so many people around me that even my own husband, like last week, he was like, I'm noticing that you're drinking a little bit more. And he's like, you don't really drink anymore, you know? And I'm like, I am kind of this was before the event. I am like out, and I've been kind of riding this wave, which is why I've just been titrated back up on medication, but we kind of caught things before it got really bad. And here I went to my doctor. We had a virtual meeting because that's how things is with COVID-19 these days. And he said, you are 100% going into a manic episode. We need to titrate you back on your medication. And he's like, I'm really proud of you because you caught it, your husband caught it. And without that self-awareness and awareness and education, you know, it could get really bad. So the difference between now and then is just, I can now tell my parents, I'm on medication. This is what I have going on. Here's where you can go learn more information about it. And I feel like they've accepted it a lot more than they did when I was growing up, where I kept being told there's nothing wrong with you. You're just hormonal and rebellious. And now it's, okay, this is serious. We need to, as a family, come together and support you. And my family, if it wasn't for my family, my friends, and my husband and my son and all of these amazing things that I call my reasons to stay, that level of support is unfortunately not available to everybody. And I think between that and my doctors and my therapists and everything else, all of that combined really helps it feel like less of a disability and more of a way of life, you know?
Yeah, and I relate like so much to everything you're talking about. And like even the conversation we had before this, like I was like sitting there listening to you, because I feel like one of the biggest things too that you said right there is self-awareness and having that self-awareness. Because I know for me, like with my experience, that was something that I did not have for the longest time. And I feel like once you finally you know, and I feel like, I think you said it too when you got the diagnosis and you heard, you know, manic depressive, bipolar, it's the same thing, bipolar disorder. And you can actually, I feel like it kind of, for me too, when I got that, it did, I felt better knowing that this is what's going on. And that way you can do research, you can look into it, you
Yeah.
can start to know, you know, your own self better
Yeah.
and really like, you know, and that's another thing too, is educating the people around you, right? Your family, your friends, people who might not know about it and might want, maybe they want to learn more about what it is or what it's like or what, you know, what you've experienced. And really being able to do that is so helpful, because I feel like so many people don't 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 do that because of maybe like
Yeah.
a fear or
The
something.
stigma.
And
Yeah.
that's what I want to get into. Yeah, next with you is this, the stigma piece of that, because I wanted to ask you too. So for you, have you ever attached a stigma to being bipolar, and if so, what did you do to overcome that?
I think that, you know, it stems from like the way you are raised and what you're exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like hearing my own family sometimes say, you know, things like, she's crazy, she needs to be on medication, she needs to be put in they call it the crazy house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know, I've been in that crazy house, and
Yeah, me
so
too. I know.
I mean, and to be honest, like, yeah, it was one of the worst experiences of my life, and I was scared crapless, and I was afraid, like, oh my gosh, this is what my life is going to be like. I'm going to be in and out of these institutions now, like. But I've come to, like, you know, this realization that, my parents are old school. The thing about mental health is the more it becomes a pandemic itself, because it is right now. It's an epidemic of people committing suicide, and there's so much coming out. The more that awareness that comes out, the more you realize that you're sitting in a room with people who are silently struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more that my parents become exposed to it at work, within their own family, it starts to kind of change the way they grew up, and the mindset of, like, you know, there's so many people culturally that do not accept that their families have these things, and they keep it very quiet into themselves as a
Mm-hmm.
family. They don't want the rest of the family to know, or their friends to know, because it's embarrassing, and it's, you know what I mean? It like
Yeah.
degrades their
Mm-hmm.
level of, like. And so I think that, yeah, of course, the way I grew up and the way that I was told there's nothing wrong with you, you're just hormonal. It's like, okay, maybe I'm not this because it's so ugly and evil and dark. Like my
Mm-hmm.
family and me, but we don't want it to be that. It can't be that, you know? Um, I even felt like, because my parents are huge churchgoers, at one point in time, like, I needed to have, like, what do they call those things? Like an exorcism. Like, I felt like I had a demon inside of me. And
Oh
that,
yeah.
I'm not even kidding. Like, I really thought I was possessed as a child. Like, I was like, what is this darkness? Like, what
Yeah.
is wrong with me? So, you know, I think that, stigma 100% is also what keeps so many people from saying anything. And then when they do get diagnosed, it's so hard to comprehend. And I feel for men, because
Mm-hmm.
society is like so unaccepting of men being emotional or having feelings or crying or being weak per se. So they
Mm-hmm.
don't seek help as much, and they don't, get the validation or the acknowledgement that they deserve when they're not okay. It's always, man up, you'll be
Yeah.
fine, brush
Yeah.
it off, you know. So, but as a female, and as somebody who I've always been a fighter. I always say, like, I'm a little bit of a tough cookie, to the point where I've always kind of fought for what I thought was right. And once I found out I had bipolar, and that it was something that I was connected to my whole life, not only did I feel validated, I felt like it was my duty to make sure that my parents understood, like, your own daughter, okay,
Mm-hmm.
has this thing that you look at other people and be like, oh, she's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And they say the word, she must be bipolar. You know,
Yeah.
they see these mass shootings on TV, and it's, oh, this person's bipolar schizophrenic. Like, even my own son had someone say to him, you know, oh, my mom's bipolar. She's completely crazy, and she did this and she did that. And he came home and he was like, Mom, you're bipolar, right? And I was like, yeah. He goes, so are you going to do this and this?
And he's
And
10.
I'm like,
he's 10.
he's 12 now,
He's
but
12.
I was like, who said this stuff to you?
Yeah.
And that's why talking about it and bringing awareness to it and what it really means and how you can live every day with it and no one will ever know is so important, because I take offense when people say things like, you know, oh, bipolar, she's crazy, this, that, and the other thing, because I would never do some of the things that some of these other people who are struggling with a deeper mental illness and having their psychosis and things, like when parents say, or people, I won't say parents, but I say parents because my dad said it once too, people who commit suicide are weak. I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's a whole nother conversation. But I said, you know, you have to understand that it's an illness.
Yeah. I think that's right.
I'm like, once you comprehend that in that moment, you are not yourself, you are not okay. You could be completely in this utter state. I always say there's two things that I've personally experienced, was being completely numb or in so much pain and in such a dark place that is a sense of relief. Yeah. No different than a cancer patient or someone who is on their way out who says, you know, I need, what do they call it? Like where they assist you with passing away?
Medically,
what
is it called? Yeah.
Where I just feel like at the end of the day, there's an understanding on my part, because I've read so much about it and I've experienced so much myself, that yes, it's a horrible place to be. And the reason a lot of people get there and they do it successfully, I think, is that lack there of support.
And exactly. And I feel like, you know, when you brought up that point of people who, you know, don't, you know, with the stigma piece of that, you know, when someone, you know, like you said, like your dad, I know for me, you know, I remember growing up, my mom was like that with her sister who was bipolar, you know, okay, she's crazy, she won't take medication, just all of these things that would come up, and I would hear this and I would sit there and be like, this just sounds so bad, and just like something, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, why would anybody who has this want to talk about it, right? If people are looking at you and saying, you know, all these things, it's like, that's what made me think, sit there and think, you know, if somebody is going through this, why would they want to come out and talk about it, ask for help, if everybody around them in their environment is like, that's weakness, you know, that's, you're crazy, or whatever thing you want to call it, you know, that's kind of, you know, what I took away from that. And I feel like that's what really contributes to so much more of the issues that you're seeing, right? When you turn the news on and you're seeing, you know, shootings and different people getting killed and things like that, and you're sitting there watching this, but then people watching are like, well, that person, you know, is probably crazy or this or that. And it's like, well, what if that person got treatment or some, you know, maybe they never even got a diagnosis or anything, you know?
You're just reminding me of something too.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you'll hear this, and this makes me so angry. You'll hear on the news an interview with the mother or the neighbors, okay? The mom, dad, the neighbors, whoever will say things like, I always thought he was a little off. Or I always thought he was in his room too much. Or he did seem like he was going through something, but we just didn't know. Or the neighbors would say, yeah, you know, we would see him walking around in the streets and we wouldn't let our kids play with him because we just thought he was a little off. So now you have somebody who needs help being rejected by an entire community, including their entire family, with absolutely no support or help or understanding. They're being bullied, they're being made fun of, which is a recipe for disaster. And I think that one of the things that really makes me angry is the term, it takes a village to raise a child. Back in the day, people used to live all on the same street, including my family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, grandmas, everybody looked out for each other. And if your kid was over so-and-so's house, they would call and be like, hey, are you feeding my kid tonight? Yeah, okay, cool, you're good, we're good. If your kid did something bad, their mom and dad reprimand you and discipline you no differently they would their own kids. Now,
Yeah.
everyone's afraid to discipline each other's kids. They're afraid to talk as parents. They're afraid to say, hey, is your child struggling, because they don't want to offend you. Everybody's sue happy. Everybody's, you know what I mean? It's like, there's no longer a village looking out for our kids. So a lot of times we have children growing up at a very young age dealing with the stuff. They become teenagers. They start going through teenager things. And, you know, there's always that kid that everyone will always say, oh, we just kind of stayed away from him. Oh, we just kind of made sure that, you know, like, we didn't get involved. And that's the opposite of what people who are struggling need. They need teachers. They say things like, yeah, he didn't really socialize very much. Yeah, he was always sitting by himself. Where's the support?
Like the perception of that. That's something else that I want to ask you about too. So the perception of being bipolar. So I know last time we talked, we both shared, you know, many people in our lives were shocked or in a state of disbelief to learn that we are bipolar. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that is? And why do you think others with bipolar disorder experience this?
Because of literally the lack thereof, you know, information out there and education, and the media, number one. Like I said, movies, television, they always, you know, make it so that these are crazy people in straitjackets. That's what you see. You're like, you're not this person. And I'm like, you're right. I'm not in this moment. Could I ever get there? Potentially.
Yeah.
But that depends on whether I get the help I need and you help me, right? That is a possibility. So I think that, you know, when you tell people that, it's a visual thing. I'm going to go back to the handicap or being in a wheelchair. I just feel like because it's not something that is obvious, right? It's not what they all see on TV. It's not the person who's walking down the street talking to themselves all of the time, right? It's not, because I lived in the city and you would see those people out on the streets living homeless, and they're seeing things and they're talking to someone who's not there. And that was everyone's perception of being, you know, schizophrenic, bipolar, all of these things, not this person who's helping the community, who's working and teaching people, who is always laughing and being comedic, you know, like who still looks like I put myself well together, you know, like a lot of times people imagine you being like crazy hair and, you know, makeup running down your face and fingernails all bitten off. And of course that can be a part of the illness, but do most people see that? No, because you keep yourself locked up in, you know, your own home most of the time when you're going through those phases. So a lot of times, like now, you know, I'm struggling with one of my medications. I've spent like the last 2 days in my pajamas. And even though I slapped on my avatar, right, for the podcast,
I know.
Which I really didn't want to do, right? Because part of me was like, let's let people see what Mimi looks like when she's a hot mess, because that is part of what I deal with on a regular basis. But
I know, and it's real. It's real.
It's not what people think it is. That's for sure. It really isn't. It isn't. There's so many famous people that have come out. I want to say Halsey. She's a singer.
Halsey.
Yeah. She has bipolar, and there's the other girl, the other singer, the Latino girl with really long hair.
I know Catherine Zeta-Jones. She's an actress. I feel like you can literally Google and look up and see so many, right? All the people, and you're like, you'll see that, and you'll see the list, and you'll be like, you're like, what? Like how? Like, and I feel like both me and you, I feel like both of us get that because we've experienced that, right? So like whether, you know, even the example you gave where you were like, you know, you could be out with people and someone is like, oh, like the weather's so bipolar today, or that, you know, whatever.
And you're like,
and then,
what is that?
And then you're like, you know, you're like, oh, I'm bipolar. And they're like, what? Like, it's like the first time they're hearing that. It doesn't really register. And I feel like, you know, it's so funny to me because I feel like, you know, when you're the person and like you've experienced that, like it's almost like it's just like another day to you. You know, you're like, oh, you didn't know, and I'll tell you, you know, here's some of my story and whatever. But, you know, I think that it is hard sometimes, because I know for me, before I was diagnosed bipolar and when I was younger and when I didn't really know a lot about it, that's how I would feel about it.
Right.
Be like, I would be that person to be like, why is she acting like that? Why is she talking like
Mhm.
that? Why isn't she
Or
just,
they
why,
say things
like,
like, oh, she has issues, or she needs help, or,
yeah, yeah.
like,
It's
I'm not going to talk behind someone's back if I see them struggling and be like, dang, girl, that girl needs help. I'm
I
going to
know.
be the person that goes and sits at the lunch table with the person sitting by themselves and be like, hey, what's going on today? What you got going on?
Mhm.
And I think there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more people willing to notice that somebody is not, obviously is not okay, and stop rejecting it and stop blaming it on hormones and
Mhm.
stop blaming it on, you know, whatever it may be. And as a parent, if my son was struggling with this stuff, because I do, now know that these things can be hereditary, right? Like
Mhm. Yeah,
panic
yeah.
disorder, you can pass this stuff down to your children. And so, I think that if your child's supposed to be taking medication, because another thing I'll hear on the news after these mass shootings is, well, he hasn't been taking his medication. It's like, okay, mom and dad, like, what were you thinking? Allowing your child who, and a lot of times I think that too, therapists, they should also make it a point that when you find out that you are, diagnosed with these things, to have your family come in for a therapy session
Mhm.
together as a group
Yeah.
and sit down and say, this is what this means. This is what you should do. And also say to these family members, if you ever want to call me as a doctor on the side and say, I'm noticing that so-and-so is, especially when you're dealing with a minor, and let's say
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
I want to give permission for my husband or my son to give you a call and say, I'm noticing that, Mimi's going through this or that or whatever,
Wow.
because
Mhm.
it's important for the people around you to be just as involved with your doctors and your diagnosis and your therapy and your medications, just like anyone else would if you were handicapped. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that 100%, because I know if I could reflect back, when I was younger, like you said you were in therapy at 15, I went at 16, started at 16, and I remember thinking like if I could have had, like because I feel like my dad's always been very supportive and like very understanding, but I feel like at the same time like he doesn't really know what's going on, but he's still there, right? Supportive. But then I know my mom was like super like not very more negative about things towards me, and I
yeah,
feel like that would have definitely probably done a lot more for me, like if I was younger, if I did have, because I remember I would go to therapy and I remember being like, oh, like why don't we all go, and then they were like no. And I feel like it's because like the point that you brought up of, if you're from a family and your kid is bipolar, depressed, schizophrenic, or whatever, you don't really want to bring that up because it's not like a pretty topic to bring up, right, to the neighbors or whatever. Like, no one
yeah,
wants to really do that. And I feel like, the more that you become comfortable with that and actually are like not so afraid and ashamed of people judging you or what, because I sit there
yeah.
and I'm like, what is the worst thing that could happen? To be honest, like what is literally the worst thing that could happen if someone knows that
Girl,
you are bipolar? And
I've gotten so
it's
used to the
like,
side of, I think that I've gotten so used to being comfortable with other people's uncomfortableness that I've also learned that I've lost friends, I've
mhm,
lost jobs, because literally people don't understand that I don't have control over it. And that
mhm,
if you do not educate yourselves, I can tell you I have bipolar. This is what it means. This is what happens. This is what I'm on. Okay. I can give you all that information. But if it doesn't actually absorb, right?
mhm, yeah,
When you start becoming manic or you start going through these things, they will treat you like your work ethic sucks. They will
yeah,
treat you like you're a bad person and you're forgetful and you're not doing what you used to do. There's something wrong. And I honestly have dealt with it so much that it's kind of like, wow, even when you're open and you tell people, not everybody is going to actually understand what that fully means. Some people will go, I understand, I have a family member who deals with it. Or, oh, I understand, I have so-and-so that's also dealing with that. Or, oh, I understand because I'm dealing with that,
yeah,
Then you have
no,
other people
mhm,
who are like, oh yeah, I deal with anxiety too. I get it. And I'm like, I didn't say, I said bipolar. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
like I have anxiety too. It's a totally separate thing. But they'll say, oh yeah, just smoke some weed or something and you'll be okay. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. So
Yeah.
a lot of times
I
have to get
agree.
so
Yeah.
used to it.
I totally get.
You just have to get used to people either
Yeah,
accepting you
I get
or not
it.
accepting
You
it.
do. You really do. And I feel like that is something that, you have to deal with for sure, 100%. But you know what? I am happy that we got to dive into this today, really have this conversation and, touch on these things and really hear from you, your perspective on this, your experiences with this, and, what you've learned and what it's done for you in your life in different areas of the things that you're working on. You know,
Yeah.
um, just I wanted to say thank you to you, Mimi, for making the time to do this. And I know that you're not really feeling well, but you look great. You sound great. You did great. This is a great episode, and I'm excited to drop this on Monday. And
Oh,
I know it's great, and I know it's going to help a lot of people who get to tune in and listen and hear parts of our stories. But I was just excited to connect, to make this happen,
yeah.
and yeah. So yeah, I mean, thanks for making this happen today.
Anytime, like I don't want people to think that, my parents are horrible people or that
No, yeah,
they,
no, no.
my people that I've come across that have kind of, not quite understood this. I think it really what it is, it's like we're growing as the human, it's just human nature, I think, that just needs to slowly like evolve with evolution and the thought about it. It's, even the way things have been changing with, let's say, service animals, like ESAs are now allowed on planes. And there's so many things that are changing that it's only going to get better. And that's why I keep telling
Boom.
people to
Right
hold
there.
on. That's what your reason is to stay, is that this is becoming a hot topic. And at first I was almost like, gosh, I feel like everybody has mental illness. And I almost got offended by it. I was like,
Yeah.
are you lying? Are you looking for attention? And then I realized, like, no, this you can go to the grocery store and you're going to see many people with disabilities visibly.
Mm-hmm.
The silent side of this is what made so many people realize that, there are more people than struggling with it.
Yeah.
And the more we educate, the more we bring awareness, the more we talk about it, the more we do these events and do these things
bring that silent side out into reality, so more people can
and just crush that
realize
stigma.
that. Yes, exactly. 100%. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing. And that's what we're going to keep doing. So
thank you for having me on this amazing podcast. Thank Jay for bringing us together.
Thank you, Jay. Hard Parking Podcast. Check him out. He is great. But yes, this episode I'm excited to put out. And I want to say to everyone listening, I hope that you have a beautiful day, a beautiful night, whatever time it is when you're listening to this. And all right, everyone. All right, Mimi. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to, going back and listening to this myself.
Of course. All right. I'll talk with you later.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.